This is a short session on making group work, both in the face-to-face and online setting. I'm Ruth Rogers.
And I'm Jordan Christie.
And we're going to talk to you about various tools to address some common challenges in setting up student groups. The first thing is the actual setup of the groups. And you have a number of choices about how you can configure student groups. The first, most obvious, is random voluntary, where you just tell students to form into groups on their own and they make the choices as to who they'd like to work with. The other is randomized, but it's teacher selected. You start with your class list and you simply group them in groups of 4 or whatever, not on any particular basis, but you select them and put them into the groups. The other possibility is to compose the groups using particular criteria. You might, for instance, decide that you want groups with students who are very skilled at a particular thing, put together with students who are needing more direction in that particular skill. So you might put high skills and low skills together. Or you might choose to put students who are very experienced with the topic together with students who have no experience with the topic. Or let's say maybe you wanted to have groups that were going to do videotaping and you wanted each group to have at least one student who had a phone that had a videotape possibility. So on the basis of some kind of resource that's needed for the group project. So you can put the groups together, compose them yourself based on any of these criteria or others that are important for success in the group project. The third possibility is something that I've been using more recently. I find that it gets around a lot of the problems with some of the other ways of doing it, is that I put the topics up, tell the students ahead of time what the topics for group projects are going to be, tell them to think about which one they'd like to do, and then on sign-up day I just have flip chart paper around the room with the topics on it and numbers for the number of students who are allowed into each group. Let's say you're going to have groups of 5, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on a signal, they go and sign up for the group that they want, according to the topic that they're most interested in. And what happens with this is that occasionally you do get students who want to work together and they'll agree on a topic and go and sign up together. But if they get there too late and all the spots are filled, they're going to have to pick something else, or maybe only one of them will get on. And typically students will sign up for a topic that they're interested in and not worry so much about who's in the group. And when the group gets together, at least the thing they have in common was their interest in the topic. So you can do that as a different way. Each of these ways of configuring groups does have advantages and disadvantages, and I'm sure with some thinking you can think about what those might be, and then think about when you might use each one, depending on what your goals are for the group project, what the group project involves, what topics there are, what's expected of the students. All those kinds of things will determine how you set up your groups. So Jordan's going to talk to you about some ways that you can do these same things online.
So within WebCT, there is a group manager, and what this allows you to do is it helps when configuring your groups. So for example, when you go within WebCT, your group manager is under your Teach tab, and you have the option there to create groups. So there's 3 types of groups you can create. The first one is a custom group, and what this does is if you want to determine who's going to be in each group. So for example, if you created 5 groups and you're going to say Ruth's going to be in this group, Jordan's going to be in this group. So it's kind of a manual process. The second one is creating multiple groups, and what that'll do is it'll allow you to create randomized groups. So you can just say I want 4 groups, and it'll automatically, depending on how many students you have, put them into those groups. Or you can specify the maximum number of students. So you may just say I want groups with 5 people in it, and it'll automatically create the number of groups that makes sense. The last option is to be able to create a group with sign-up sheets. This is a similar thing as Ruth was talking about, having the chart paper. You can do this online, so you can actually put topics in and then have students sign up for them.
So once you've set up your groups, the second challenge that you face in student group projects is addressing these various challenges and keeping them going, keeping the students being productive and working together in the group. So here are some things to think about. First of all, one of the problems that students encounter in maintaining their productivity is that they don't really know how to work together. They may have been thrown into groups many times in their school experience, but perhaps no one has actually taught them how to work in a group and how to have that interpersonal relationship. So you might, as an entire class or individually as groups, encourage them to create some kind of guidelines and rules so that they can know what their expectations of each other are. You also might direct them to establish some kind of communication system, whether it's going to be email or phone or texting or whatever, so that if there's a problem, they know how to get in touch with one another outside of class. You also might give them a template for analyzing their various skills, resources, and preferences so they get to know one another, who likes doing PowerPoints, who likes presenting, who likes doing research, who's good at writing, that kind of thing. And they get talking about who's good at what so they can make the best use of their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. If there are personality or cultural obstacles in the group, you might need to sit down with the group and help problem solve around these kinds of things. And you may even need to do some direct teaching about things like group roles, interaction, conflict resolution, or active listening. Give them some tools for working together and resolving their differences. You yourself may need to do some training in this so that you can help students do it. Another possibility is to give them some kind of a log that has different group roles on it: leader, recorder, reporter, facilitator, whatever is relevant to the group project at hand, and tell them to keep an attendance list where each person is assigned a different role for each time the group meets, and that those roles rotate. So everyone gets a chance to build their group skills, and nobody ends up being stuck doing one thing every time. When possible, provide class time for students to work in groups together. You may not be able to let them do all their group work in class, but the more time you can give them, the better. And if you can't give them very much, at least give them 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning or end of class to check in with each other and plan their next steps and make sure that they're on track. The second problem in maintaining productivity is perhaps you have students who aren't pulling their weight, don't contribute, or don't even attend class. You might consider establishing a 2-session rule where students who miss 2 group work sessions without communicating with their group are dropped from the group and they have to do an independent study project. This protects the groups from non-productive members. However, the person who does the independent study would only get a maximum of a passing grade because they didn't complete an actual group work outcome. And you need to make sure that your course outline reflects the fact that a group work project is going to be required. The other thing that's often a problem is students get together in groups to work together and someone else has got all the materials and so they can't do their work. So I suggest you create some group work folders that holds all their work, all their documents, and you collect them and keep them between classes so that that folder with all their documents in it is always there. If students need to work on things outside of class, then certainly they can use electronic documents to work on things outside of class. And what about if students actually drop the course? Well, first of all, group work for a project that's graded should really not come in first semester because there's too much moving around of students coming and going in first semester. When you get into second semester or second year or third year, you're less likely to have students dropping courses. But even so, establish your groups as late in the term as possible. Wait for that initial shuffle of students coming and going to finish, so maybe week 3 or 4. And if a group does have a student drop out, consult with them, perhaps be willing to adjust their workload, expect a little less of them because they will have fewer students in their group. The third thing that can happen with students in terms of maintaining group productivity is that perhaps they simply don't know how to manage a long-term project. The only thing they don't know how to do is procrastinate until the last minute and then get it done all at once. So you might spend some time with the students teaching about project management, talking about how to decide what the workflow will be, when their interim deadlines will be, sort of what their goals should be for getting the pieces finished so that they have lots of time at the end. So you might give them some kind of template to do their project planning, when will they have this done, when will they have that done, and you might actually require them to submit progress reports, give them some kind of a template as to what they need to submit, and make this worth marks toward the final project so that they at least get moving on something and get meet those deadlines because they have progress reports that are due. You might also require that they submit draft formats of the project at certain intervals and then just provide comments, formative feedback on it and give it back. Again, that promotes some scheduling of time to make sure they meet the deadline, and provide coaching and troubleshooting along the way. Stay in touch with the groups in terms of how they're doing on their project. Don't just leave them alone until the deadline. So here are some ways that you can do these things online.
So in terms of group discussions and helping students facilitate the process, within WebCT you can create group discussion areas. So what I typically do for my courses is give them their own area where they can discuss. This is where they can post if they want to share attachments, if they want to just chat about the assignment, they can do so. So within your group manager, once you've created groups, you have the option to create a group activity, so you can create a discussion topic. And what that will do is it'll create separate discussion topics for each of your groups. This is also a good way for you to be able to check in and see what they're doing, because as a faculty member, you can view all of the group's discussion boards. So you can go and see if you can see, that certain groups aren't having much activity, you can kind of prompt them and get them back on track. It's also possible within WebCT to create group assignments. So what this allows you to do is it'll create a drop box for each group, and then when you provide feedback, it will go to all of the groups. So this kind of helps to streamline the marking process so that you're not giving the same feedback to each student. You can send it to them as a group.
The final area where we sometimes have difficulties with student group projects is assessing them and how we get into problems with workload and fairness and equity. So let's talk about some ways of doing that. The most common complaint from students about group projects is that one or two people end up doing all the work and the rest ride on it. So I suggest that you break it down and do it a little differently so that you have what we call a 360-degree evaluation, where students are assessed by the teacher, themselves, and their peers. So you as the teacher is going to assess, the product of the group work. Use a rubric, focus on the content in the presentation, whatever it is that's appropriate, and all students get the same mark on the product. Then as well, you would assign them to do a self-assessment and a peer assessment on each of their group members. And this assessment focuses on group process rather than on the product of the group project. And these are done confidentially, so students never see what each other said about them on their on their peer assessments, but they're averaged, and if there are trends or themes emerging from the students' comments, you feed those back to the student. You say your peers assessed you on an average of 4 out of 5, and here are some of the comments they made, both positive and negative. I suggest that you give them rubrics for these self and peer assessments. They're the same for the self and peer. One just says self-assessment, the other would say peer assessment, and require them to provide evidence for their marks. There's some kind of rationale. They can't just give a person 4 out of 5. They have to answer a series of questions and actually provide some sort of evidence or rationale for why they gave each of their marks. And then these are averaged for each person to represent the peer portion of the grade. So in terms of how this might look as a formula, I suggest that you keep the bulk of the marks on the product. That is the major thing, that they have to present a good finished product. So that might be 70%. Then they might get 15% on their self-assessment, and 50% of their mark comes from their peer average. And my experience with these is that students, if anything, are slightly harder on themselves than you might be, and that they do really appreciate the chance to provide feedback on their peers, so that those who do extra can be rewarded, and those who don't pull their weight can also bear the consequences of that. And the very fact that you set these up ahead of time and that students know this is going to happen often helps students to be a little more focused and do their share, because they know that their mark can be different if they don't. So what kinds of things might be on those assessments? You might have items around attendance at group meetings, how much they contributed to the group process, what role they played, or various roles they played, whether they completed their assigned tasks, including part of an oral presentation, if that's part of the group project, how well they communicated within the group process, and any special skills or contributions they made over and above the call of duty. So these are items that might be on the self and peer assessments. And remember that they must provide some kind of details or rationale to support their mark in each of these categories on both their self and their peer assessments.
So one thing I just wanted to talk about is we do have a tool called iPeer, which right now we are piloting, so it's in a development phase, but we've had several faculty try it out, and it's been used successfully. What it allows you to do is, right now in WebCT there isn't a peer review process that's built in, so iPeer is a separate product that you can use outside of WebCT to facilitate peer review. So you can load your students into iPeer, you can put them into groups, and then you can assign them either a particular rubric or just sort of a rating scale where they can review each other. And then at the end, what will happen is, as a faculty member, you'll get a report, so you can actually see how they've marked each other. So just to give you an idea of what it might look like from a student end, a student would log in, you would assign them a username and a password, and then they would have a certain peer evaluation that they would have to complete. So what it would do is it would list everybody in their group. So for example, this is the first person. You could have a rubric where they would go through and complete the rubric for that person. The comments, that's where they can include their rationale. There's also a general comments area, so they can include other information there as well. And then each different student, as they go through, depending on how many people are in their group, it would bring up that student and they could continue to complete the peer evaluation. You can also include self-evaluation, so as part of it, they can also review themselves. What will happen is once they complete this, on your end, you'll get a report as a faculty member, which gives you a summary of how each individual has marked themselves and their group members. So this is a tool that is available upon request that can be used to help facilitate the peer review process.
So these are some things you might think about in terms of maximizing the productivity and the usefulness of group work in your classes, both face-to-face and online, and some of these online tools can be used to support your face-to-face group work projects as well. However, this has been a pretty quick review, so if you wanted to explore any of these ideas in more depth, please come and see us at the Center for Academic and Faculty Enrichment, and we'll be happy to talk to you about setting up your own group project in your class.